Now, Washington Mornings on the Mall. 105.9 FM. And AM 630. WMAL.
7:06 on WMAL, where Washington comes to talk. Brian Wilson, Larry O'Connor, and on the line, our good friend, our legal analyst, hail fellow well met, Joe DiGenova. How are you, Joe?
I'm great after that game yesterday.
Boy, wasn't that something?
Oh, listen, that's pro football.
I'm telling you, it was a fun game to watch. And we're going to get Trevor Maddich on the 8 o'clock hour to give us all of the scoop. You know, every time Trevor comes on, I always go, man, I learned something.
Yep.
He's a smart guy. Joe, a lot of stuff we want to catch up with in the legal world, but late last week we learned that the Supreme Court is going to take up the issue of gay marriage. Now, given all the things that they were looking at, what are they actually going to determine in this particular case?
They are going to decide whether or not the limitation on benefits, like Social Security, Medicare, survivors' benefits, which the United States Congress enacted under the Defense of Marriage Act, are constitutional. Is it a denial of equal protection to deny benefits to a same-sex couple when you give those same benefits to heterosexuals? That's the precise issue they have taken up. It's an equal protection question.
That's a rather narrow question, isn't it?
It is very narrow, but boy, have they picked a case that just tugs at your heartstrings. The facts in the case are that these two people, the two women, were married for a very long period of time. The will of the deceased woman left everything to her mate, and because their marriage is not recognized by DOMA, the survivor has to pay $700,000 $480,000 in estate taxes, which she would not otherwise have to pay if she were a heterosexual. So this is a dynamite legal question. The fact that they have chosen this case with that issue leads me to believe that they've got the votes to strike down DOMA.
Now, Joe DiGenova, there are a lot of issues with regard to same-sex marriage that whether a state makes it legal or not,
right,
there are legal recourses that a same-sex couple can go through, things like hospital visitations,
right,
and things like that. Is this one of those things that without the state, there's just no recourse at all? Had they planned ahead, could they have been circumvented these additional estate taxes?
Well, sure. They could have distributed. They could have had a trust, a living trust,
right,
which distributed everything before death, each to the other. In other words, you can do that today. You can avoid the estate tax by having a living trust.
Exactly.
So the answer is...
And you don't have to be marry to do that. You could, Brian and I could have a living trust with each other.
I'm not giving you one red cent. I love you, but I'm not giving you any of my money.
And I'm sure your listenership would go up tremendously.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
But you don't put it past us, Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I wanted to know that because I know that there, many times I hear this that same-sex couples, even though the government doesn't afford them the same rights and protections, there are legal means to get most of those rights and protections.
Right.
Otherwise,
and the states provide, even the states that don't allow marriage allow civil unions for the most part, so that you can get rights and benefits under specific statutes that grant the rights of civil unions, which are not called marriages, to same-sex couples. All of this can be covered by the law. So, they picked a really hard case. And, sometimes the court does that for two reasons. Because it wants a hard case to rule one way or the other to show why it's important. And that could be to uphold DOMA or to strike it down. So this is really... in fact, they also took the Proposition 8 case from California, right, which, as you know, started out with a court... the California Supreme Court ruled that same-sex marriages were constitutional under the California state constitution. Then Proposition 8 said, no, you can't do that. We want the California Constitution amended to say it's only between heterosexuals. The people passed that, and then people sued, several couples sued to strike down the referendum. That was struck down by the Ninth Circuit, and now the Supreme Court has taken up the case.
Fairfax.
Very, very interesting question because it's a state constitution issue. It's not a federal constitutional issue that was decided by the Ninth Circuit.
In Fairfax County, The county government has been asking a question about whether or not they can ban smoking on all county property, but also whether they can require the county employees to attend classes that would help them quit cigarette smoking if they are indeed cigarette smokers. They went to the county attorney, and the county attorney comes back and says, well, you can order them to go to the cessation classes, but you can't make them pass the course, and you can't make them stop smoking. And they also say you can't make a decision about whether or not to hire somebody based on whether or not they smoke because of Virginia law. Any thoughts on that case?
Well, this is interesting. This is the evolution of the victimhood. What happens is, remember, we got into, don't smoke, it's bad for you. 30 years ago, it became public law. You can't smoke in certain places. We've determined, and we've now created this sort of brain teaser, is smoking a disability? If it is a disability or something like it, you can't not hire somebody because they're a smoker. Now, the one thing you can do is if they're an employee and they smoke, you can make their insurance premiums higher because they're more likely, the statistics are very clear on this, smokers are more likely to become more ill all the time chronically. So you can charge them more for their insurance. That's rational. But you cannot use it as a reason not to hire them.
Now, Joe, just to shift gears a little bit, the George Zimmerman case was back in the news this last week. And this is interesting. You remember NBC News, they played the audio of the 9/11 call where George Zimmerman reports that he thinks this guy is up to no good. And then the dispatcher says, well, what does he look like? Is he black? Is he white? Is he Latino? And George Zimmerman replies, he looks like he's black. But then NBC News, they edited that, and they made their audience hear only George Zimmerman say, he looks like he's up to no good. He looks like he's black. And you remember that just set this whole story on fire and suggested there was a racial motivation. He's now suing NBC News for that. Is there any case there?
Yes. What they did was NBC News tried to make it look like he had volunteered that information, when in fact he had given that information in response to a question from the 911 dispatcher. They clearly, and the person who did that editing was fired by NBC.
And is that very relevant, because they're claiming it was just an innocent mistake, but now it seems to me that they're stuck.
Well, they're going to. One thing is for certain: Zimmerman will get past the motion to dismiss. In other words, there will be discovery in this case, and NBC is going to have to put its people on the witness stand because they've made things public. NBC said the person who did this was fired. It was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was a purposeful edit. This is not a mistake. I mean, and if it was. Well, even if it was a mistake, that doesn't mean there's not liability. So the question for NBC is, do they want to just pay this guy some money and have this go away, or are they going to actually go through litigation over the question of their editing techniques? By the way, this is a repeat performance for NBC. Remember Dateline and the blowing up of the car with the fuel tank?
Sure.
Which they said was the fuel tank when, in fact, they actually exploded the fuel tank.
And Richard Jewell.
NBC has had a history of really bad news decisions over the years. So they come to this with, they do not have clean hands as an institution.
Of course, hiring Al Sharpton as a host is really their best move.
And a guy who's a tax deadbeat. He owes thousands of dollars in taxes and debts to various people. I mean,
wait, who is O'Donnell?
Hey, huh?
Who is a tax deadbeat?
Al Sharpton.
Oh, Sharpton is. All right.
He owes taxes.
Oh, that's the tip of the Sharpton iceberg.
Oh, I mean, this is, well, of course, that's their standard of journalism at NBC.
Got to leave it right there. Joe DiGenova, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Bye.